Hi, my name is Yassir Eddebbar and I am a scientist at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Today we'll be talking about tracking carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. These measurements are known as the Keeling curve. This is the Keeling curve. It shows a long time series of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it's named after Dr. Dave Keeling, who began making these measurements at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii and at the South Pole and Antarctica back in the 1950s, and he maintained these measurements until his passing in 2005, after which his son, Dr. Ralph Keeling, has been making and continuing these measurements. The first discovery that Dr. Dave Keeling has made when he began these measurements is the seasonal cycle of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. You can see them in the Keeling curve as these small wiggles that happen every year, and what they show is a slow growth of carbon dioxide during fall and winter in the northern hemisphere, and a slow decline during spring and summer in the northern hemisphere. And this happens every year as the planet breathes CO2 in and out. We see the reaction at the top. Carbon dioxide plus water plus nutrients are combined during photosynthesis to create organic matter such as plants and plankton in the ocean, which also releases oxygen. This causes a drawdown of CO2 from the atmosphere in the northern hemisphere. During fall and winter, as this organic matter such as plants and plankton begin to become decomposed and are respired by microbes, they release CO2 back up into the atmosphere. So, Dr. Dave Keeling has essentially showed that the Earth breathes CO2 in and out every year. We see this visualization here in ocean chlorophyll concentrations. This represents the growth of plankton in the ocean, as well as land vegetation index that shows the greening of our planet. Again, during spring and summer, as the northern hemisphere becomes greener and there's more growth of plants and plankton, carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere, and as winter and fall comes along and that organic matter is decomposed, it releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. And you can see it in the wiggles in the Keeling curve, but another important feature of the Keeling curve is its long-term growth. This is the other major discovery that Dr. Dave Keeling has made throughout more than 5 decades of CO2 measurements. And what is shown is that CO2 has increased from about 315 parts per million since he began his measurements in the 1950s to about 415 parts per million in today's measurements. So about 100 parts per million increase. And what that long-term growth shows is the addition of carbon dioxide by human activities into the atmosphere. Essentially the burning of fossil fuels such as natural gas, petroleum, wood, and coal, and their combustion with oxygen that releases carbon dioxide, water vapor, and pollutants into the atmosphere. And we see here in this visualization by NASA where areas that are highly populated, like the east coast of the United States, the west coast of the United States, highly populated areas in Europe as well as in Asia and India, we see carbon dioxide concentrations that are very high. They're released up into the atmosphere and are mixed by wind patterns. This is again reflecting the high concentrations of CO2 that are driven by fossil fuel combustion in this region. In the tropical region, you also see that there's some higher concentrations of carbon dioxide being removed or being released by biomass burning. This is the release of carbon dioxide by clearing of forests for agricultural use and sometimes as well by natural fires. So where do we make these measurements of CO2? We make them throughout the world, from places like Alert, Canada, and La Jolla, California here at Scripps, all the way down to the South Pole. And we want to make sure that we sample free tropospheric air. This is air that is not contaminated by local sources. So we don't want to make measurements that contain contamination, for example, from cars passing by or from power plant. So we want to make sure that we sample air that is representative of the free troposphere above us. To do that, we send vacuum flasks to each of these different stations, and technicians go on a day where the winds are blowing in a convenient direction where we can make these measurements. We open the flask, which sucks in atmospheric air, close it, and send it back to the Scripps CO2 laboratory that is run by Dr. Ralph Keeling, where it's analyzed for carbon dioxide and other gases as well. These measurements, known as the Keeling curve, are really crucial for example, we use them in climate models. Here's an example of carbon dioxide simulation by NASA that shows CO2 being released into the atmosphere is mixed by wind patterns and weather patterns. We also see a breathing in and out of CO2 in the Amazon region every day, as well as a variety of other features. For example, the southern hemisphere, where there is very little human activity, there is very little CO2 being emitted. And so, as we use carbon dioxide in these models, we can understand the global carbon cycle, we can begin to understand aspects about climate change and various other features of the climate system. For more information, visit scripsco2.ucsd.edu and keelingcurve.ucsd.edu or our climate change resource website at Scripps. Thank you for your attention.